Yes, this is the plenary lecture. The topic is the ocean governance. Yeah, I'll start with a disclaimer. Disclaimer is that this is a review. This is a review of the present status of ocean governance. It is neither an endorsement of the statements made here, nor my personal views, or the views of the organizations I previously associated with. If you want more information, you can mail me at my email ID, mohanjosephmodel@gmail.com. When coming to this, there are I'm not able to advance the PowerPoint. Yeah,
So,
there are a lot of.
You just tell me to change the slide. I will change.
I think you have to do it from your side.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Just change the next slide, and I will change.
Thank you. There are some facts and some myths about the oceans. One of the myths is that ocean belongs to the bordering countries, but in reality, oceans belong to the whole world. Another myth is maritime countries have full right over the oceans, which is not true. Oceans belong to the whole world. Therefore, even landlocked countries have equal rights on oceans. For example, Nepal, they have as much right on the oceans as India has got, or any of the states of India has got. Governance is the responsibility of maritime countries. It is not true. Governance is the collective responsibility of the entire mankind. It is very easy to manage the ocean governance by a few institutions or few countries. In fact, it is not right. It is such a complex issue, complex task, and complex structures. So ocean governance requires sustained inputs and participation by all countries. Can I have the next slide? Now you will ask me, what is ocean governance? It is the process, agreements, rules, institutions developed to organize the way in which humans use the oceans. It involves the policies, mechanisms, management, and also the people across the whole world. Now, human pressure on the oceans, both from land and atmospheric based sources and at sea, as well as from the climate change, has led to unprecedented levels of stress on the oceans. We all know this. Hence, there is global concern and needs for developing concepts, guidelines, and tools for ocean governance to ensure equity, sustainability, and a framework for informed governance. The global contribution of the ocean economy is estimated to be around 3.6 trillion a year. 3.6 trillion, and supports more than 150 million jobs. This is as per the UNDP Water and Ocean Governance estimates. 80% of global trade is through the ocean surface. Marine and coastal environment provide key sources of economic development. Now, there are some statistics, some economics, some econometrics. Global marine product in Western Indian Ocean alone, as per the 2017 estimate, is 334 billion US dollars. The primary assets, marine fisheries contribute 135 billion, mangroves 43 billion, coral reefs 18 billion, seagrass 21 billion, adjacencies, the productive coastlines 93 billion, and carbon absorption 24 billion. So it's a huge lot of money which is dependent on the ocean, ocean environment, ocean trade, ocean activities. Next slide. With exhaustive and divergent activities in the oceans, no single government or agency can govern the oceans, which is because it's so vast and the activities are so large and diverse. This calls for a deeper understanding, sharing of information and policies and processes and cooperative efforts of all countries to effectively govern the ocean interests of all countries in a way that ensures equity, sustainability, and benefits for all. Ocean governance has global, regional, and national components. Now, there are many important sectors in the ocean which are to be governed. The most important thing is food from the oceans. It includes fishing and aquaculture. Surface transport, which is passenger cruise lines. Shipping involves cargo, oil tankers, dry cargo, LNG, packaged industrial products, metals and minerals, food and food products, fossil fuels like oil, LNG, minerals like cobalt, zinc, manganese, rare earth materials or ore, polymetallic manganese nodules, cobalt-rich ferromanganese crust, polymetallic sulfide deposits. Then the renewable energy, wind, tides, waves, currents, and solar from the seas. Drinking water through desalination. Many countries depend on the drinking water which is desalinated from the coastal waters. Many of the Arab countries are using this, and many other places also desalination water is desalined water is procured from the ocean sources. Then we have marine litter, which is becoming more and more important in recent years. Biodiversity, its protection, its conservation, is right proper understanding, and marine pollution. There are regulations which are binding on the coastal zone. Then the sea also, the oceans also provide leisure and tourism opportunities. The ocean governance, next slide. The ocean governance has to address ocean spaces and its uses in two different ways. First, existing and continuing division of ocean spaces, that is the zonal and geographical, where maritime spaces are divided into zones that are subject to national jurisdiction and those beyond national jurisdiction, country jurisdiction. The second is problems arising from the zonal and sectoral aspects of the ocean spaces through a series of norms and tools implemented via cooperation and coordination across actors and institutions across various countries and various institutions. Next slide. A huge lot of information needs are there. A lot of information is required for ocean governance. Huge and continuing information needed for governance. Continuous information top-ups, updates are needed. Information management technology can help support ocean governance. However, technology alone is not sufficient. International open access database is needed for information mining and analysis. And access to such information also is important. Next, the concept of ocean governance. This has a long historical background for this. Right from mankind started using the ocean for food. It was the first activity. Then onwards, it was free for all. And you look back into history, you will understand right from the days of the Vikings, how oceans paved way for transportation, for colonization, for attacking, for military purposes. In this, up to the 17th century, it was free for all, and then anybody could do anything. But in 17th century, when it became more organized, there were two major countries or major concepts by two major countries, that is, which prevailed upon the ocean rights. The mare clausum, the other one is mare liberum. Mare clausum was the Portuguese notion. It gives rights over the ocean to the coastal states. But the Dutch mare liberum was different. It defended the understanding of the freedom of the oceans. That these were the two major principles which prevailed in the 17th century. But then, as more and more countries came into utilizing the ocean for various economic purposes and benefits, in 1950 to 1980, the primary open access system of the ocean became a system where coastal states gained sovereignty, rights, and controlled and exploited the marine resources of their country region. At that time, in 1954, the United States extended their jurisdiction over the whole continental shelf of USA. Till then, it was the coastal region nautical miles was only 3. They expanded from 3 nautical miles to 200 nautical miles. And when they did this, so many other countries also followed steps. They also started increasing from the near shore few kilometers or few miles to 200 nautical miles. Then the conflicts of interest started, and as it increased and world nations became uncomfortable with that kind of dynamics being developed, the United Nations Convention of Laws of the Seas, we call it UNCLOS, UNCLOS, which is the Constitution of the Oceans. After prolonged negotiations over years and years, finally it was signed in 1982. It became the law of the seas, or the Constitution of the Oceans. Consequently, the 200 nautical miles zone became known as the exclusive economic zone. UNCLOS withdrew the focus from sovereignty, jurisdictional rights, and freedom for individual states, and put the whole emphasis on shared responsibilities. UNCLOS provided the foundation basis for states' action to protect the marine environment. If you go through the provisions of the UNCLOS, in part 12, 46 provisions are included, which are specifically dedicated towards environmental protection. So environmental protection is very critical and very unique and very fundamental to ocean governance. There are zonal and sectoral approaches. Both these approaches are vital considerations in ocean governance. The zonal aspect simply refers to who possesses the mandate or the authority to prescribe the regulations and enforce them based on the demarcated national boundaries or country boundaries. And the sectoral aspect relates to the type of activity which are to be regulated. So these are the two aspects of governance. Now we come to the UNCLOS and zones. There are various zones which are defined under this. We are aware of this, but again I am repeating it for clarity's sake. Zone 1 is the area within the national jurisdiction, the country jurisdiction. Up to 12 nautical miles, it is the territorial seas sovereignty. The contiguous zone follows the territorial seas, which may be declared for up to 24 nautical miles. In order to allow the coastal states to take measures specifically pertaining to custom, fiscal, and sanitary issues and enforce regulations in its territorial seas. Then the exclusive economic zone, what we call as the EEZ, which may extend from up to 200 nautical miles, in which the coastal states have sovereign rights to exploit both living and non-living resources. However, in contrast to the territorial seas, the coastal seas has limited non-economic rights in the EEZ. Coastal states are also accorded sovereign rights to exploit economic benefits from its continental shelf up to 200 nautical miles. And in some countries or some places, it extends up to 350 nautical miles. It is up to the country to decide, or even beyond from its baseline. Now the zone 2, these are the areas beyond the national or the country jurisdiction. UNCLOS recognizes two distinct zones. One, the high seas. Here the water column that falls beyond the EEZ of any coastal state. All states enjoy numerous types of freedom, particularly with respect to fishing and fisheries. Fraternally, since it belongs to no one, it is everybody's property. That doesn't mean no particular state has any jurisdiction to enact specific legislation, be it environmental or otherwise. Nobody can make a rule in this zone. However, this does not mean that the entire high seas area is subject to lawlessness or anarchy. It is not. The flag state, that is the state to which the ship is registered, exercises jurisdiction over the ship flying its flag and the activity it carries out in the high seas. They will follow the rules and regulations of their country whose flag they are flying in the ship. So it is not anarchy, it is well regulated. The second zone created by the UNCLOS is the international seabed area. It encompasses the seabed area that falls beyond the continental shelf area claimed by any coastal state and declares it as the common heritage of mankind. The International Seabed Authority, ISA, decides who does what in this area. It is under UNCLOS, this area is defined as the area. This is the area under the International Seabed Authority. Then it comes the sectoral aspect. modern law of the sea involves numerous sectoral regimes. For example, the fishing sector, the shipping, the mining, the recreational, subjecting each of these to separate sets of laws. So there are large number of laws which are governing these activities, and these all countries are bound to follow these regulations. Next slide. Fishing and mining activities taking place in an adjacencies will ultimately affect cumulatively the marine environment of surrounding areas and impair the ability of others to meaningfully exercise and enjoy their rights. So there is an impact of these activities on the adjacent countries. As such, the sectoral aspect of the modern law of the sea has contributed to the proliferation of international organizations, large number of organizations with carefully defined mandates to regulate particular activities. This includes, among others, the International Seabed Authority, that is the ISA, which I mentioned earlier, to govern mineral mining activities in the area, the International Maritime Organization, IMO, to regulate global shipping activities, the Fisheries and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, to promote sustainable fisheries measures, and the International Whaling Commission, IWC, to control whaling activities in the open ocean. Now we come to, next slide. Now we come to the norms and tools. The term norms is used to refer to a handful of notions that apply to ocean governance. Some concepts, some principles, some understandings. But the tools refer to various measures and strategies designed with the aim to protect the marine environment from human activities at sea. So we have norms on one side, we have also tools. In the context of ocean governance, tools are both supplementary and complementary to norms. So some of the norms also will appear under the tools. Some norms, some UNCLOS grounded, that means approved and internationally accepted norms are the no harm or prevention of transboundary harm rule, environmental impact assessments, the precautionary approach, the ecosystem-based approach, sustainable development, the polluter pays principle, and the principles of cooperation. These are all various norms accepted by all. Now coming to the tools, some of the norms have taken in the form of tools also. In addition, environmental policy mechanisms and area-based management tools, that is ABMTs, strategies such as maritime spatial planning, MSP, and marine protected areas, MPAs. These are some of the tools which are the fallout of the norms. While understanding these norms and tools, we have to look at it with a little more carefully. Ocean governance is a very conflicting area. It's a fluid, there is boundaryless environment. It's fluid boundaryless environment. Diverse interests are articulated by nation states, organizations, companies, local communities, and also the indigenous people. They all have their own interest, economic or otherwise, their own interest, and they adhere to some of these while making these norms. In international platform, when such norms are made, though all countries are present there, as you know, The mighty they are more equal than others. They have more power to say yes or no. They control. It's not a neutral area. Ocean governance doesn't develop in a neutral area. It is influenced by dominant nationalities, powerful countries. So smaller countries or countries which do not have that power to argue, resolve, are always overlooked. The dominance of economic considerations over other issues, for the benefit that market mechanisms also help to solve environmental problems. However, this lead to challenges and gaps in regard to communities and indigenous peoples, their needs, their concerns, and their livelihoods. So this is a factor which we have to remember when we look at the ocean governance principles. Recently, the last few decades, neoliberalism and property rights issues have emerged. That is right from 1950s, a new political economy, which is known as the neoliberalism. The question of the commons being a central one. Neoliberalism is becoming a dominant form of ocean governance. What everybody has equal right, everybody can claim, everybody should benefit. The problems of overfishing and overcapitalization is seen in the open access regime and the lack of property rights. If it is free for all, without any control, overcapitalization happens, overfishing happens. We are witnessing all this in many situations, and we are also experiencing the fallouts of this. Therefore, critical research does not see the problem in the lack of property rights, but in power relations established through colonialism, capitalism, and global concerns. It is very evident. Many countries, neoliberalism as a basic principle that the state should not interfere with the market. We can do whatever we want, but it still relies on the state to create and maintain property rights. Our country, we are not following any of this as of now. The individual transferable quota system, ITQ, to marketize and allocation of fish catch is not happening in our country. Similarly, the quota management system, QMS, it was introduced in 1984 during a neoliberal economic restructuring as a response to the crowded and overfished inshore fisheries. We all know that inshore fisheries are the places where the maximum amount of fishing activities take place and maximum amount of fishes are caught. Therefore, there is overcrowding, there are property rights, there are also conflicts between different users, there are conflicts of interest. Introduction of quota management system led to exclusion of small scale fisheries. Fishers, the people who are depending on their livelihood, they were excluded when the quota systems, that is quota management system, came into place. QMS and similar solutions do not solve all the problems. They were recommended by most fisheries economists as property rights were seen as an incentive to sustainable fisheries. And theoretically, it is so. But in reality, when it comes to the grassroots level, it is not so. We also come across something called ocean grabbing. Ocean grabbing is one of the fallouts of this kind of partitioning. Ocean governance does not always only promote sustainable development. It can also lead to negative outcomes like ocean grabbing. Ocean grabbing is a process within which access and rights to marine resources and spaces are reallocated, that means redistributed to various sectors. In this process of redistribution, zoning, the creation of marine protected areas or fisheries policies, all these can deprive local communities of the resource use and access and lead to privatization or enclosure of marine resources and areas. It can also result in loss of livelihoods, loss of income, loss of employment, and increase their poverty levels. So this is one fallout of this ocean grabbing. Now, next slide. Coastal communities, indigenous people, and ocean governors. These are all connected to each other. They cannot be treated independent of each other. Currently, we have, or many countries have, a top-down approach in policy making by the so-called experts, and they do not consider the complex ways fishing communities are socially and emotionally integrated with marine species. We know that the so-called experts who make these policies, mostly they have no understanding of neither fish, nor fisheries, nor fishermen, nor their livelihood. What is really required is not data and analysis by the so-called experts, but more knowledge on the communities to enable more efficient and effective governance. Communities are not consulted, not involved, not made a part of the policy making framework. The so-called experts are maybe they are bureaucrats, maybe they are scientists, or more really they are armchair scientists. They have only some theoretical textual knowledge, but they have no understanding of the grassroots level situation, what is happening in the seas. So global trends, developments, and decisions have effects on local population, and these social and cultural impacts have to be taken into account in policy making. Unfortunately, this is not happening. We have a number of national initiatives in our country. There are so many sectors which are connected to, which are involved in the ocean resources, their utilization, economic benefits. Ministry of Earth Science looks into the ZR research. They have disaster management, safety at sea. Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. They look into marine protected areas, bioresearch, pollution, biodiversity conservation. Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare look into fishing, mariculture, marine fisheries policy. Ministry of Shipping and Surface Transport look into harbors, ports, and recently added Sagarmala. Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gases look into oil and natural gases, their exploration and exploitation. Ministry of Commerce look into marine products, value addition, international trade. Ministry of Home Affairs look into national and marine security. Ministry of Defense involves Navy, Air Force, Army, Coast Guard, and India's Blue Economy Draft Policy, which is released last year, identified 7 priority areas. One is National Accounting Framework for Blue Economy and Ocean Governance. 2, Coastal Marine Spatial Planning and Tourism. 3, Marine Fisheries, Aquaculture and Fish Processing. 4, Manufacturing, Emerging Industries, Trade, Technology, Services, and Skill Development. Number 5, logistics, infrastructure, and shipping, including transshipments, container ports. 6, coastal and deep sea mining and offshore energy. Very important area. Now we have solar energy from floating panels. We are also looking into energy from waves, tides, and also from wind, and also windmills in the floating platforms in the open seas. And number 7, security and strategic dimensions. Now, country has enacted many policies and laws in the last few decades. National Environmental Act 1998, Integrated Coastal Management Act in 2008, Disaster Management Act, Biodiversity Act, Environment and Conservation Act, National Marine Fisheries Policy, Blue Economy Draft Framework, Integrated Coastal Zone Management, Marine Spatial Planning, Marine Protected Areas. So there are so many policies and laws which our country has already made. In addition to this, next slide. In addition to this, we have regional initiatives. Here, the United Nations Conference on Oceans in 2017, our Ocean Conference in 2017 October at Malta, 4th International Review of Global Program of Action for the Protection of the Marine Environment from Land-Based Activities, 2017 in Indonesia, and 3rd United Nations Environmental Assembly focused on pollution, December 2017 at Nairobi. We have also United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, that is CCRF. We are all aware of that. Regional fisheries bodies like, next slide please. Regional fisheries bodies like the European Union Common Fisheries Policy, United Nations Environment Assembly Resolutions 2016, which looks into oceans and seas, marine litter, sustainable coral reefs, and the Samoa Pathway SIDS. That is the small island developing states in the Caribbean region. They had a meeting at a place called Samoa, and they came out with a framework that is known as the SIDS, that is Small Island Developing States, SAMOA. Now, Samoa is the place where they met and then made this framework. The resolution also is known as the Samoa, which means SIDS, Accelerated Modalities of Action, Samoa. That is an international framework which was established in the year 2004 in Samoa. In addition to this, there are regional seas conventions and action plans. Now, how blue economy and ocean governance are connected, interrelated, or influenced by each other. Blue economy aims at sustainable use of oceans for economic gains, not only fishing and aquaculture, but all activities in the economic activities which are to be derived from the use of oceans, including transportation, including cruise, including energy, including drinking water, including tourism, all kinds of activities are critical, that all are related to the blue economy. So ocean governance is critical to blue economy because without set rules, regulations, guidelines, it will be chaos. Numerous stakeholders representing diverse sectors need regulatory framework to use the oceans for gainful purposes. Blue economy initiatives open up numerous new activities, and all will have to adhere to norms and rules for ocean governance. Zonal and sectoral regulatory measures ensuring environmental health and sustainability are to be followed by all user countries and communities. Our ultimate aim is to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 14, conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development It is our ultimate objective. That same ultimate objective is the ultimate objective of the ocean governance also. This all can be achieved only if you have a regulatory framework under a single umbrella. It is spread over various ministries, various sectors. There is no interrelation, interconnectivity, no dialogue happens. Some are doing something, somebody else is doing something else. There is no coherence, there is no unity. So there is need for an umbrella, a framework, a regulatory authority for our country, which will look into all aspects of ocean governance, including activities of the blue economy. Thank you all.